In exactly 47 seconds, $4.2 billion vanished from public scrutiny. Ursula von der Leyen didn't expect the ambush. She didn't see the black dossier Viktor Orban was about to place on the podium. The cameras captured everything. The European Parliament in Strasbourg witnessed something unprecedented. What did the Hungarian Prime Minister reveal that made the most powerful woman in Europe flee her own chamber? The session began like any other Tuesday morning in January 2026. Routine budget discussions, standard procedural votes, the kind of bureaucratic ballet that puts even the most dedicated political observers to sleep. But at exactly 10:14 a.m., Viktor Orban rose from his seat in the Patriots for Europe section. He wasn't scheduled to speak. He had no formal slot on the agenda. Yet when he approached the microphone, carrying a thick black binder marked only with shadow budget, every translator in the building suddenly became alert. The Hungarian Prime Minister spoke with the calculated precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. His voice carried across the chamber with unnerving calm. "Madam President," he began, looking directly at von der Leyen, "I invoke Article 325 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union." The reference to fraud against the Union's financial interests sent an immediate chill through the chamber. This wasn't political theater. This was an accusation. Orban opened the dossier. The first document he held up was dated September 14th, 2025. Not a public record, not a parliamentary filing, an internal memo from the Budgetary Control Committee that was never meant to see daylight. The Hungarian Prime Minister's next words would shatter the morning's routine forever. "Can you explain to this House where the $4.2 billion allocated for the Emergency Energy Transition Fund actually went?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Von der Leyen, who had been reviewing notes at the Commission's desk, slowly raised her head. Her face, usually composed with the practiced neutrality of a career technocrat, showed the first crack of uncertainty. The hall fell into absolute silence. Even the constant hum of translation equipment seemed to fade. But Orban wasn't finished. He produced a second document. Wire transfer records. Transaction ID, EUX99LUX. The funds allocated for Eastern European energy infrastructure hadn't reached Warsaw or Budapest or Prague. Instead, they had been routed through a Delaware-based subsidiary with operational branches in Luxembourg. The company name on the transfer order made several MEPs visibly shift in their seats. Greenstrat Global. "Madam President," Orban continued, his tone growing sharper, "perhaps you can also explain why this consultancy firm, which received EU taxpayer money meant for energy infrastructure, lists on its board of advisors someone very familiar to this chamber." The silence became deafening. Von der Leyen's hands, previously steady on her papers, began to tremble almost imperceptibly. The accusation was surgical in its precision. Orban wasn't suggesting mismanagement or bureaucratic inefficiency. He was alleging direct embezzlement. EU funds intended for critical energy projects in vulnerable member states had allegedly been funneled into a private entity with connections to the Commission president's own family. The scale dwarfed previous EU scandals. This wasn't about text messages or influence peddling. This was about $4.2 billion of European taxpayer money. The reaction in the chamber was immediate and volcanic. The right-wing Patriots for Europe and Alternative for Germany delegates began pounding their desks, demanding an immediate suspension of proceedings. Matteo Salvini was seen frantically gesturing to his advisors. The Greens and Liberals, typically von der Leyen's most reliable defenders, sat in stunned paralysis. Even Guy Verhofstadt, never at a loss for words, remained speechless, checking his phone with increasing urgency. When the moderator turned the microphone toward von der Leyen for her response, the cameras zoomed in to capture what happened next. The Commission president leaned forward, her mouth opening as if to speak. Then she stopped. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was actually 17 seconds of dead air broadcast live across Europe. Finally, she managed to stutter a reference to procedural irregularities and unsubstantiated claims, But her voice lacked its usual authority. The moment of truth came when Orban produced his nuclear option, a third document. An internal commission email chain dated October 2025 showing direct correspondence about expedited approval protocols for the very consultancy firm in question. The email signatures were clearly visible on the chamber's large screens. Von der Leyen realized she couldn't deny the document's authenticity without risking perjury. To acknowledge them would be political suicide. That's when protocol completely broke down. Von der Leyen's security detail suddenly moved closer to the commission desk. Instead of addressing Orban's allegations about the $4.2 billion transfer, she signaled to her chief of staff, Björn Seibert. The microphone caught the sound of papers being hastily gathered and a whispered exchange. "Not here. Get me out." The commission president stood abruptly, her chair scraping audibly across the floor. As von der Leyen walked toward the exit, the opposition benches erupted. "Resign! Resign!" The chants echoed off the walls of the Strasbourg chamber. Marine Le Pen was on her feet, pointing directly at the retreating figure. The camera operators scrambled to follow the unprecedented scene of a commission president abandoning her post mid-session. But Orban wasn't finished. As von der Leyen reached the chamber doors, the Hungarian prime minister delivered his final blow. "This is only file number 1, he announced to the now chaotic chamber. "I possess 15 terabytes of encrypted data obtained from a whistleblower inside the Berlaymont building. Secret negotiations with Kyiv, unapproved weapons contracts signed without parliamentary oversight. The European people deserve answers." The implications of Orban's revelation extended far beyond one afternoon in Strasbourg. Within minutes of von der Leyen's exit, the European Public Prosecutor's Office received a formal complaint. Laura Kodrutsa-Kovesi, the chief prosecutor, immediately convened an emergency session. If a criminal investigation is formally opened, von der Leyen would lose her institutional immunity. The Commission would face its gravest crisis since its inception. Financial markets reacted with brutal efficiency. The euro dropped 0.8% against the dollar within the hour. German automotive stocks, already vulnerable to Chinese competition, plummeted as investors realized that EU trade policy could become paralyzed. Volkswagen and BMW saw their market capitalization shrink by billions before European markets even reached midday. The silence from the Berlaymont building became increasingly damning as hours passed. No press release materialized, no denial was issued, no explanation emerged. In the high-stakes world of European politics, such silence typically indicates either panic or guilt. If Orban's documents were fabricated, the Commission's response should have been immediate and furious. Instead, the leadership vacuum grew more apparent with each passing hour. The constitutional implications are staggering. If von der Leyen is forced to resign under criminal investigation, the entire College of Commissioners may be compelled to step down. The EU's legislative machinery would grind to a halt. Critical aid to Ukraine would face interruption. The Green Deal implementation would suspend. Climate targets would miss their deadlines. The carefully constructed architecture of European integration would face its most severe stress test since the 2008 financial crisis. But the political ramifications extend even further. Orban's calculated ambush represents more than just one man's vendetta against Brussels technocracy. It's a direct challenge to the entire premise of European federalism. The Hungarian Prime Minister has effectively weaponized transparency to expose what he characterizes as systemic corruption at the heart of EU governance. Whether this represents justified whistleblowing or calculated sabotage depends entirely on one's perspective on European integration. The timing of Orban's revelation is particularly devastating. With Donald Trump returning to the White House and demanding increased European defense spending, the EU needed to project strength and unity. Instead, it now faces questions about the basic competence and honesty of its leadership. American allies are already privately expressing concerns about transferring additional responsibilities to an institution whose financial controls appear compromised. Perhaps most troubling is what Orban's 15 terabytes of data might contain. His reference to secret negotiations with Kyiv suggests potential unauthorized commitments that could have massive fiscal implications. If European leaders have been making promises to Ukraine without proper parliamentary approval, the constitutional crisis deepens exponentially. Member state governments, already struggling with domestic austerity measures, cannot afford surprise liabilities running into tens of billions. The mainstream media's initial reluctance to cover the story comprehensively only amplifies suspicions of institutional protection. When traditional outlets focus on procedural disputes rather than substantive allegations, it reinforces populist narratives about elite conspiracy and media complicity. Orban understands this dynamic perfectly, which is why his presentation was crafted for maximum viral impact across social media platforms where traditional gatekeepers have less influence. As European capitals scramble to assess the damage, one reality has become inescapably clear. The old order is fracturing. The cozy relationship between Brussels technocrats and national governments depended on public trust and institutional legitimacy. Orban's bombshell has potentially shattered both. Whether this represents creative destruction that ultimately strengthens European democracy or terminal damage that accelerates disintegration remains to be seen. The clock is now ticking on multiple fronts. The European Public Prosecutor's Office has 30 days to decide whether to launch a formal investigation. Financial markets will continue pricing in political instability until clarity emerges. Member state governments must decide whether to rally around von der Leyen or distance themselves from potential scandal. Most critically, European voters are watching to see whether their institutions can demonstrate accountability or whether the populist critique of Brussels corruption has been validated. What no one saw coming was how quickly decades of careful institution building could be threatened by one man with a black dossier and the political courage to use it. Viktor Orban may have just changed the trajectory of European history. The only question remaining is whether he saved it or destroyed it.